now to the latest in the conflict in Gaza and Israel. Israel's Defence Minister Yoav Gallant says its troops are in the heart of Gaza City as troops continue to gain ground in the besieged enclave.
Israel's war cabinet has confirmed it would take overall security responsibility for Gaza after the war is over. But that doesn't mean it will govern the area, something that the White House has also said it would oppose. Well, joining us now in the studio to discuss the latest is former Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. Sean, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Is it realistic that Israel will have full control of Gaza anytime soon?
Short answer is no, bluntly. It's one thing to move militarily into the city. At the moment, they say they're in the heart, but they're still fighting their way in. And it's forgetting that there's this Gaza metro, this labyrinth of tunnels underneath the city. That's where Hamas will be hiding. They'll be popping up, doing hit-and-run tactics, causing a complete nightmare for the Israeli Defence Forces. And ultimately, that's where they believe that hostages are being kept. And you can only imagine how difficult it would be for the IDF to go into those tunnels to fight, knowing that they've actually got potentially a couple of hundred of hostages down there. Even if you were to take Gaza City and move in there, have you destroyed Hamas? Which is what they've declared, is that a lot of Hamas will have already fled to the south and they will be blending in with all of the population, the Gazan population, and therefore you haven't defeated them. So there's a really interesting conundrum. It's not clear to me what the military objective is for the Israeli Defence Forces at the moment. And even when they've taken the city, is that success, and what do they do next?
Well, that's the issue, is it? Because Netanyahu made a comment about continuing essentially to run the area. That was then sort of countered and diluted a little by some of his own people. He didn't really mean that. What do you sense is the intention of the Israeli government here?
It's very hard to see why the Israelis would actually want to run Gaza, and I think there will be a lot of international opposition to that. The prevailing view seems to be that having exterminated Hamas, let's park that for a minute because we don't think that's possible to do, then probably hand over to some Palestinian authority, but with some sort of security guarantees to make sure that you don't have this repeat again. But ask me practically how that would work, I have absolutely no idea. And the moment the Israelis pulled out, you can just imagine that Hamas would fire a volley of rockets across, as an act of petulance, what has actually been achieved, apart from tens of thousands of casualties and a city. Gaza City, let's be clear, already had 50% unemployment across Gaza. Now they've ripped out a load of infrastructure. Quality of life's gone through the floor for the population, for the families, for the children there. What's the future for them? What is that next step? And it's not clear anybody's really thought that through.
And you don't get rid of an ideology, do you? I mean, it's the air bubble effect. You push it one way and it comes up somewhere else. And Hamas would argue that whatever happens, we ain't going anywhere.
One of the challenges about the way this conflict has been framed is that from a West perspective, it looks like a counterinsurgency. In other words, Hamas are your insurgents, and what you need to do then is win the hearts and minds of the locals. In Afghanistan, we were having to be very careful not to kill the civilians because otherwise you'd lose their support. So it's a hearts and minds operation. What Prime Minister Netanyahu has framed this as a war of national survival against Israel. What that means is that actually he goes in and takes any consequences of his action. Now, in this country, whilst we've been at war in all sorts of areas for some time, we haven't had a war of national survival for over 75 years. Very few people remember World War II. They don't remember the horrors of that war, the massive number, millions of civilian casualties. And because Netanyahu's framed it as this war of national survival, what flows is the sort of levels of casualties and no evident way of splitting Hamas up from the Palestinian population. So actually, as you say, it becomes a breeding ground for the next generation of Hamas.
And Netanyahu saying that he would not consider a ceasefire unless the hostages are released. Can you see that happening anytime soon? And also, if they are released, can you actually see Netanyahu calling for a pause in the fighting?
Hamas is no match militarily for Israel. Israel is the dominant military force in the region. Ships, tanks, and aeroplanes, whereas Hamas has got hand grenades, pistols, and the only leverage that Hamas has got is the hostages, because they can effectively start to threaten them and potentially, because not all of them are Israeli nationals, some of them are foreign nationals, and not all of them are civilians, some of them are military. And Hamas has been very successful over the years at holding hostages and reaping benefits from that. They're a currency, and they're about the only currency that Hamas has. I cannot see any prospect whatsoever of Hamas giving those over, because they will know it will be Operation Certain Death that would follow the very next day.
Yeah, and a political resolution to this, what needs to happen? You know, Biden made a phone call, talked about a ceasefire as we were discussing there. The United Kingdom has a position on it. We've got protests going on all over the place. Will this ultimately be settled globally or domestically?
Well, I try and stay out of politics in this. I try and stay the military side. Let's start with there's no military solution to this, and yet everybody resorts to military action. It's pretty evident that there is such deep-seated hatred on both sides that is not going to be resolved domestically. It's going to have to involve international pressures, not only from America, but also the Arab world. And somehow people have got to try and see this as not taking sides, which is what we do at the moment, and see humanity as being the issue that's got to be preserved. Because I honestly can't believe that there are families in Israel, families in Gaza that want this fighting to continue. And therefore, how do you find a way that humanity wins rather than everybody being polarised and taking sides?
Well, Sean Bell, thank you so much for joining us this morning and really explaining from your perspective what on earth is going on, making sense of a very sad and complicated situation indeed.